for our sharing today from Acts of the Apostles, chapter 8, 8. May we read. Saul was there, approving murder. This was the beginning of a great persecution against the church in Jerusalem. All except the apostles were scattered throughout the region of Judea and Samaria. Devout men buried Stephen and mourned deeply for him. Saul, meanwhile, was trying to destroy the church. He entered the house after house and dragged off men and women and had them put in jail. Miraculous signs that he did. At the same time, those who were scattered were about preaching the word. Philip went down to a town of Samaria and proclaimed the Christ there. All people had paid close attention to what Philip said as they listened to him and saw the miraculous signs that he did. For in cases of possession, the unclean spirit came out shrieking loudly. Many people who were paralyzed or crippled were healed. So there was great joy in that town. Many times we hear the word of God. There are times it makes impact in our lives, and there are times it makes not so much impact in our lives. Many a times before we come to the word of God, we have a set up mind that this is what I want to hear. We have a set up mind that perhaps nobody can change us except God himself. This set up mind, it's not such very good because it leaves us perhaps unchallenged when the word of God is meant to inspire and to challenge us, and at the same time to encourage us to lift up our spirits. And we know that our human nature, the composition of it, always want that consoles us. We do not want afflictions in our lives. We don't want something that is painful in our lives. That is human nature. Yet, the Word of God, since it possesses the truth of why we exist and what we ought to do and what we ought to discipline ourselves, it is a bit challenging. Not very much painful, but it is challenging. Many a times, we don't want to hear it being spoken about or preached about because it touches the depths of our souls, the core point of our hearts, and at times it points that what we don't like. So, we see, looking at this point, we see the life of St. Paul. It is said from the first line of this Acts of the Apostles, chapter 8, that I just read, that Saul was there approving his murder. You can imagine Paul, who was trained already. He had enough education somehow. He had an idea of who Christ was. But having turned back from Christ, here he is approving murder for the apostles. And let us hear that this was the beginning of a great persecution against the church in Jerusalem. It is said that all except the apostles were scattered throughout the region of Judea and Samaria. And it is said, devout men buried Stephen and mourned deeply for him. Saul, meanwhile, was trying to destroy the church. He entered the house after house and dragged off men and women. Paul was filled with such a very terrible character that in those times his work and his mission had been swallowed up by becoming unbeliever. That he is here once who was proclaiming Jesus. He's here now persecuting the Christians, dragging men and women, each from their houses, for persecution. It is so painful to see how a man of God and one who believes in God can within an instant of time change into something different. And I keep saying that our faith is certain. That means our faith needs to be watered daily. The way we see ourselves, sometimes becoming even self-righteous, we forget that it takes only a second or a blink of an eye for one who knew God to behave as one who never heard of God. What happened to Paul can happen likewise to I and you. We must be very careful in what we allow to come into our lives, what we allow to come to enter into our soul. Because the moment we open that window that keeps this chamber of God, the moment that we do not know where the evil comes from, it is said that a holy man falls 7 times. The evil spirit is always around us. It is very hard that we can sense the evil spirit if we are not connected with God, if we are not connected in prayer and unconnected with one another. It is very hard. It is in most of our societies where we have been brought up that we can encounter this presence, because the presence of Christ was already taught to us. But at a certain level, we realize there is so much to question. We question the Word of God. We question what has been taught to us. I'm not saying it is bad to question, but our questions must be aligned with that what we are about to receive. There are many times we open the door for the devil and the door for God. There is no way these two things, these two persons will ever meet. One is evil and one is good. They do not connect. They do not share. Each of them is different. Each of them have a different character. And you know, just like Paul or like Judas, who had the best of teachers, as we can see, we can end up living with that teacher and never gain nothing in our lives. Look at the life of Judas. Judas had a shepherd along with him, around him. Judas had a teacher around him. Judas had the simplest of men around him. Judas had a hero around him. And look very well what Jesus turned to be. Judas turned to be a murderer. He murdered Jesus. So it is not very much surprising that most of us, being human beings, in our human nature, It takes no longer, it takes not much time for us to turn into an attitude that can never be believed it is we who were once like saints. This is obvious, and we must be very careful day after day as we live the life of God. Every moment we wake up in the morning, we must tell it to ourselves, we are weak, and point out our weaknesses, because this is what will help us to overcome what is coming from these different doors that are open. It will help us to filter that which is of God and that voice which is from the evil one. If Judas perhaps would have paid attention to this, perhaps he would not have become this unforgiven man. But as we know, so far, we have not heard of him being forgiven. And it is so painful to know that he spent all this time sharing at the table of the Lord, sharing at the table of the Master of all masters, sharing at the table of the King of kings. And I'm praying that I and you, that this don't happen to us, that each and every day we get up, we share at the table of the King of kings, and end up being those who will be damned into hell, those who will be damned into the eternal fire, those who are there being messengers of darkness. This can be very much regretful. Spending our whole life into the house of God, or being aware of the word of God and what he wants from us, being aware of the will of God and what he wants of us, and we didn't do it. That is the greatest evil I could ever think of. It is ill, and we must accept that this can happen to each one of us. So, I and you have an invitation that we look at this life of Paul and see that lastly, Paul comes to recognize that he had failed. He comes and repents his sinfulness, and he is accepted by God. However, it wasn't that easy. Why should we wait for the penance of God? Why should we wait unto him? At this time of COVID-19, God is speaking to us. He's speaking to me and you. He's asking us, do you have to wait that I visit your family so that you can return to me? Do you want me to come to your kings so that you believe that I am God? Do you want me to wait that this disease reach out to you so that you can know how painful it is? Let us look at the depths of our lives and seek to serve God now that we have energies. Now that you can speak, use your speech well. Now that you can talk, really bless others and bless yourself. Now that you can see, pray to God that your eyes see that pleases him. It is the most beautiful thing that we can do with our lives as we live here on earth.